welcome to our talk. It's on cyber education, challenges and addresses skills gaps. So I suppose to actually start this off just with a bit of introduction to who I am. So Dr. Jordan Allison, I'm a lecturer in computer science at the University of Gloucestershire, and I'm currently the academic course leader, the Digital Technology Solutions Professional Apprenticeship. So while I'm talking about cyber education and particularly cybersecurity education, but obviously the remit I am in some respects talking a bit wider than that as well. Not only am I a lecturer of the subject, but to give you a bit of an insight from my perspective for this talk so you understand where I'm coming from. I was originally an outreach and widening participation officer. So what essentially that means is I used to go out to a variety of schools and colleges to deliver events, workshops, for a variety of students from year 7 all the way up to the year 13 or equivalent, schools and colleges across the country, both for business, but computing and some cybersecurity related events and workshops as well. So I got a real insight into how is the subject actually being taught, not just at one institution, but across multiple institutions, the challenges that are actually faced in teaching the subject matter, and generally what that subject matter actually is in terms of how teachers can actually do that. Following that, I've also been a school governor. So I've served on a business management committee of a governing board of a school. So again, in terms of the education landscape, I've got this, shall we say, wider view in terms of, what cyber education is and can be. So that's just a bit insight into my background so you understand where I'm coming from throughout this talk. Throughout this talk, though, I'm going to be talking about a few different things. Firstly, why cyber education in the first place? Secondly, some overall challenges of teaching. And I'll have an overall kind of framework of what I try to picture of the educational landscape. Also, the importance of context in terms of actually teaching cyber. And as well as this, trying to map what curricula is actually taught and how that actually has cybersecurity embedded within it and why some of these subjects are actually taught the way they are. So a few things that I'll be discussing today, but all pertaining to cyber education. So if I think about cyber education, the first thing is actually why cyber education in the first place? Why are we actually having this talk? Now, if we actually think about what's actually going on in the world, I'm sure many of us listening on this talk right now will be aware of the prevalency of different cybersecurity attacks, the prevalency of, should we say, poor practice in terms of cybersecurity. So it's almost a double-edged sword. Well, not only is there increased prevalency and attacks and everything happening, but we've got this change in landscape. So for instance, Palo Alto Networks very recently in their kind of annual report indicated there's 3 times as many attacks observed now than before the transition to remote work. Now, many of you, myself included, will be remote working more so than we did before COVID-19. Now, I'm not going to go into COVID-19, but the fact of the matter is here that people are changing how they work. Now, if someone's going into an organization, they might be following the organization's policies, they're following and using the equipment at their organization, which might have various security features enabled on it. Suddenly, with a shift to remote work, what we have is people in their own home environment using their own equipment, perhaps. And with that, they might not have the knowledge or, should we say, the cybersecurity awareness to actually ensure good practice in their home environment. Myself, I'm working at home right now to give you this talk. Okay. Now, when we think about this change in landscape, not only is the shift to remote work just, that's just one thing. We also have just the general curiosity of so many individuals and the ease of use of a variety of tools now that are available. So when you have students having access to so many resources online, and when I say students, I just mean general, not university students, but just of any age, curiosity, there's so many tools that they can access. There's an article I read very recently of a 14-year-old, they're essentially creating ransomware script, purely just because they're interested in what it is, but that caused some issues. That's the problem. Now, when we think about, okay, we've got this change in landscape, we have all these issues coming into the fore, why do we have this cybersecurity capability gap? Why are there not enough people going into the sector? Now, some literature contends, yes, it's an essential pillar of what is the national cyber culture. But if there is this cybersecurity gap, capability gap in addressing this, how can we encourage more people to get into cybersecurity as a profession? Now, this is where I'm going to start discussing some of these challenges that exist within this, because it's not as simple as, okay, let's start teaching cybersecurity, because it's not just about teaching cybersecurity. If you're teaching cybersecurity, you actually need students that want to actually study it in the first place. It needs to be in a format that's engaging. It needs to be in a way that's not, it's in parallel with the rest of subject matter that they need to study at school, for instance. And also, who's actually doing this teaching in the first place of the subject matter. So, challenges as teaching. Variety of issues exist. You have, firstly, a variety of student backgrounds. Now, when I say a variety of student backgrounds, what we have here, not only at a university environment do I experience this, when I have my first year undergraduate students, some of them have a vast programming background, some of them have done networking before, some have been playing around with virtual machines, others, nothing. Now, we could say that this stems from what they're doing at the immediate stage before coming to university, okay, at that sixth form or equivalent level, so doing A levels or T levels, or should we say the BTEC level 3s. Now, even in these subjects, those people teaching those subjects have the same issue depending on what the students have done at the GCSE level or equivalent. Some students may have done programming, others less so. Some students may, at primary school, have been starting using Scratch, get an introduction to programming, others, again, not. So you have this variety of student backgrounds, which causes a very large disparity in the teaching environment. You have to have this balance of how am I actually teaching the subject that caters to all these learners, where the reality is that all these learners have very different needs. That in itself can cause an issue. Now, by default, in the university environment, what we tend to do is make sure everyone in the first place in that first year is up to scratch with where they need to be getting that foundation level. However, there's already going to be some students with some more advanced expertise that could already go quite a few steps further than that. As well as this, we have the lack of staff expertise. Now, this is quite crucial. Now, if you look around now, you want to get a job as a computing teacher, you can get a bursary to actually go and do this, and then, you know, you can get 28 grand a year, for say. So government's trying to encourage people to go into this as a profession. This is all well and good, but a teacher itself will have a variety of different things to do. A computing teacher in many schools is likely to be very isolated. They might be the only computing teacher, or maybe one of two, as opposed to, say, a science department or a maths department, which will have a team of 6, 7, 8 individuals, perhaps, maybe more. Now, with this, without this isolation, you haven't got as many people to lean on for advice, to get feedback on how you're doing things. But it also means that if you're a computing teacher in a department of one, you're managing the whole department, you're doing all the teaching, you're doing all the marking of that subject, you're trying to make sure that that what you're offering is meeting the curriculum specification, and at the same time, the landscape's changing. So you have your own needs to keep up to date on the subject matter at perhaps a much greater rate than some other subjects. This inevitably leads to a lack of staff expertise without being able to keep up to date with what is going on. So if I just take this a few steps further, what I've tried to do in this image here is I've tried to map how all these factors lead to essentially cybersecurity skills gaps. Okay. Now, if we first start, well, cybersecurity is evolving, attacks are changing. We have a few different things here. One, a lot of organizations might go straight to having these tight security policies and processes in place. Some of these are justified, that's all well and good, but some of them can be a contradiction to actually the effective teaching of cybersecurity. For instance, if you have too many security policies and processes in place that are too tight and there's no freedom to change, you might not be able to install or use any of the required software and tools for effective cybersecurity teaching, i.e. you have the inadequate resources for teaching it. That being said, cybersecurity constantly evolving. That leads to senior leadership within an educational institution not fully understanding the needs, perhaps, of a computing department. Because what happens is, if you're talking about senior leadership in the school, for instance, they might be interested in finance, overall strategy. Computing is one subject of many. And then what we also have is, how are we allocating resources fairly across department areas? And then suddenly computing saying, but I need more resources, I need more resources. They're saying you're already getting the biggest chunk of resources, and they're saying they might need more, which it can be and is often the case for the updating that is required. What this means is you have this limited pipeline of qualified or knowledgeable teachers entering the sector, because if it's constantly changing, it might be that your skill set is out of date quite fast. Now, what this also means is the qualifications themselves are almost out of date as soon as they are printed. This is something I've experienced when I spoke to many educators of computing in schools, colleges, because the process that it takes for a specification, you're making sure that the actual qualification is meeting various needs, it's got the employer consultation, it's got all this to go into it. And then by the time a school actually can deliver that qualification, the teacher's trained up to deliver that, already certain things might be out of date. This is what I refer to as curriculum lag. And curriculum lag is certainly quite prevalent in computing subjects because of the time it takes to update. Now, the other issues are perhaps general issues that many of us may be familiar with. Insufficient time and a heavy workload. That in itself, teachers have many different responsibilities, not just for computing. The problem is, though, if a computing teacher is not taking part in professional development and they're not upskilling, then they are very quickly losing what is current for cybersecurity, because it is constantly changing. I was teaching a class this morning and I was talking about security breaches, and the first thing I did was actually just have a quick look online and think, okay, what's happened in the last week? Okay, we got another instance of Qbot ransomware. We've got another instance of some kind of breach with LastPass passwords. There's so many things constantly evolving and changing. So they don't have the knowledge. So when you have this lack of time, you have these tight security policies, you have this lack of funding, you have this disparity of students with different learning needs, not only do you end up with these inadequate resources for effective teaching, but you have institutions that are teaching what they can based on the resources they have, not on what might lead to the most effective teaching of cybersecurity, or making sure that students are leaving with the best kind of cybersecurity awareness that they perhaps could have. Now, a lot of this comes back to that many of the qualifications, especially at the school, college level, are not focused on cybersecurity anyway. They're more focused on computing, computer science, IT. Cybersecurity is part of that. Now, there's a whole scheme of work that you can argue that actually cybersecurity should be embedded in other ways, but surely it should form a fundamental part of these overall computer qualifications anyway. So for all this mapping, as you can see how they're all interlinked, but this is what can end up leading to this cybersecurity skills gaps that does exist. I think one of the things that I haven't actually touched upon this is this, not only actually the lack of staff that's leading to the poor teaching and funding resources, but if you are knowledgeable in cybersecurity, the fact of the matter is that by and large, you can probably get a much higher paying job in industry than actually feeding back to the start of this cycle to start educating it. So again, it's further leading to that limited pipeline of qualified teachers. So what is actually being taught? Okay, I've mentioned different qualifications, but I think it's important to actually state what is actually being taught. Now, I'm not talking about university courses here. What I'm going to be looking at primarily is what is taught in the kind of secondary level, that being the kind of GCSE A-level equivalent. So one of the things that I've done with one of my previous dissertation students is we utilize CyBOK. So cybersecurity body of knowledge is what CyBOK is. And we've essentially used this framework and the different knowledge areas as illustrated on the right of this table, and gone through and mapped how do these topic areas, are they embedded within various curriculum specifications? Now, we've looked at 4 at the GCSE or equivalent level, GCSE IT by Pearson, and the computer science by both AQA and OCR. These are the different examples. We've also looked at the BTEC digital IT by Pearson. As well as this, we've looked at the pre-university, immediately prior to university courses, such as various different A-levels in IT and computer science. And we've also looked at the T-level qualifications, such as T-level digital support and T-level digital protection. Now, I appreciate that many of you listening on the school may be familiar and heard of GCSEs, BTECs and A-levels. So just to give you some context on T-levels, these are a much newer qualification, only been around for a few years now, but they're the equivalent of 3 A-levels, and they certainly embed quite a bit of work experience or work placement opportunity into the T-level. So students are getting quite a broad perspective there. For me personally, I think that's quite a beneficial qualification if you wanted to study it. The problem, however, is actually getting that work placement that's suitable for the subject area. So in terms of this mapping, as you can see, some areas are common across law and regulation across all these courses. Now, when I say there's an X map to this, that doesn't mean that what is actually taught is going into more depth than others. It's just that on this specification, it is on there. Of course, just because something's on a specification doesn't mean it's being taught effectively, per se. But it's on the specification that will be following. So law and regulation, yes. I think what is quite interesting with this is they talk about law and regulation, but only a few courses actually talk at all about any kind of aspect of risk management and governance. Now, when I look at these knowledge areas, I'm not just looking at it in the sense of what requires heavy technical expertise or resources. For example, if we take something, let's say network security. Network security itself is covered across, but depending on how that is taught, it might need certain resources more than others. So network security might be taught very theoretical. It could be taught with resources and actually be very practical. There's some aspects, however, I think like risk management and governance, which is very theoretical in nature and doesn't require the technical resources at all, but it's only actually covered in a few different qualifications here. Same here with human factors, not really there. Unsurprisingly for me, aspects of forensics, should we say the other side of the coin of cybersecurity, is only actually covered in the BTEC IT by Pearson. And even with that, where you see the asterisks, it's not a core module, so it's not something they have to do. It's an optional specialist module within the qualification. So forensics is something that is certainly lacking in the, should we say, the level 2 and 3 or GCSE and A-level equivalent subject areas. So when you actually look at this mapping, I think what is actually quite shocking is there's some aspects covered in the GCSE courses, more so than in A-level. Now, this RQF level 3 is after students have done RQF level 2. But then you have something like the A-level computer science, covers law and regulation, cryptography, and network security. Now, yes, this is computer science, and there's various other things that are going to be covering it, but the fact of the matter is, all of these qualifications are not specialising in cybersecurity. But in terms of these knowledge areas, only 3 are covered, where in the BTEC digital IT, 52%, so over half of the knowledge areas are covered. That I think is quite shocking in terms of there's more cybersecurity covered in some of the more advanced courses than before. That being said, as I mentioned with the T-level, there are many areas covered within this, but again, there's some optional specialist modules. So it doesn't surprise me that these have higher amount of areas covered, but do bear in mind that the T-level itself is 3 times the weighting of the A-level computer science. A student may do 3 A-levels, but they'd only do the 1 T-level. So they might, as well as computer science, do maths or physics or something else. So there is and should perhaps be more. So I think while this is, of course, it's a bit of a work in progress, I think there's more work that can be done in terms of looking at this qualification area. It gives a starting point of where is cybersecurity prevalent in the qualifications taught currently. And for certain aspects, we can certainly see where it is lacking. And also at the next level, certainly where can further study, whether that be university or degree apprenticeship or elsewhere, where can that actually focus on where certain skills are certainly being missed, such as forensics per se. Further to this, one of the things that I've done in some of my previous research is actually trying to map what is influencing this choice of curriculum. So while I've mentioned these vast array of curricula that exist, institutions are making a choice on what to offer in terms of their teaching. And that's going to be made a choice by various different individuals. And it's going to be based on a variety of factors. So this research here is based on 32 interviewees within the education sector, senior leadership, head of departments, and teachers themselves of computing. And overall, kind of ascertain 4 main areas. Some institutions are inherently focused on labour market information. What is the demand for this nationally? What is the demand for this from employers locally? We need to hit what is required locally. There's a big focus on getting this labour market information and choosing a specification that hits that. For other institutions, it's purely based on resources. Look, this is the staff we have. Okay, we haven't got the staff to offer this qualification, so we're just going to do what we're doing. Okay, it could be we haven't got the funding to offer these different qualifications. Great, the T-level offers these, more advanced concepts, perhaps, but we need the right infrastructure to be able to do so that effectively. If they don't have that, they might not choose to do it. For some, the labour market information informs the relevance of the qualification to industry needs, but sometimes that relevance purely comes from a teacher's perceptions. They may have worked in industry before and they think, well, actually, this is what I think is relevant. So this is what we should offer. This is where the T-levels are certainly hitting that quite hard for some institutions in terms of, well, they're getting this work experience, so it's got to be relevant to industry needs. Also having an up-to-date specification. All of these aspects, however, filter into what could be deemed as a qualification's overall attractiveness. Is there actually extra funding available? Is there too much paperwork involved? Is it actually suitable for our learners? Is it actually aligned to the strategy that we want moving forward? Fundamentally, however, can we actually achieve good student outputs? And again, the outputs, pass rates plays a big part in terms of any qualification that may be chosen. So there's a few things that can influence this, but I think with embedding cybersecurity, it's actually a case of you need not only the teachers who are on board with that as a narrative in terms of that you're going to start teaching it, but you also need it in the sense that the senior leadership with any educational institution also needs to support that vision that we are educating all of our students, not just those studying computing, that cybersecurity should be part of their general literacy, just like there's literacy skills, math skills, what is often termed as digital skills or digital literacy. Surely cybersecurity literacy, perhaps, or however you want to term it, should actually be in there too. So if we try and understand the context of teaching here, when I'm going to start talking about context, I'm going to use a kind of framework. Okay, and this framework typically looks at not just the kind of macro environment, but it looks at what are these initial factors that influence the teaching context. These 2 aspects are called presage factors, and they pertain to both the student and the teacher. You then actually have the process of teaching itself. So you have not only factors coming from a student's background and experience and a teacher's background and experience, but then the actual learning environment itself. And then finally, this all leads to actually, what is the outcome of all of this? And naturally, a student and teacher's background and how it's taught will lead and affect the overall outputs. So if we start to try and understand the context here, okay, the macro environment, I'm sure we're all very familiar with general trends that are going on in the sector right now. And when I say the sector, it's not just actually that for computing or cybersecurity. It's actually that we have this recent shift to more remote working. Right now, we have a variety of trends that, because of that, are leading to excess attacks. And what we're wanting is to ensure that students and generally the general workforce are prepared with the skills that they need, not only now, but in future for jobs that don't actually currently exist. That is certainly the challenge. So again, what I'm talking about here is some general factors, not only from interviewee quotes from those in the sector, and to hopefully add some backing to what I'm telling you. This isn't just me saying it. This is, you know, voices from those doing it. So this curriculum manager computing from a college that I spoke to, they essentially said, what I find is that what we're delivering here, or as in the education sector, is always behind the industry. And naturally so, it's because of all the processes that are there. Now, again, literature indicates, yeah, emergency remote teaching from COVID. How are we actually teaching in an online capacity? There's an increased focus on people developing their skills or taking courses in an online area, but how do you actually teach some of these more advanced topics in an online capacity? It's all well and good saying, okay, we're going to start teaching programming, or we could offer programming and teach that in an online way. That's all well and good, but the infrastructure and teaching approach needs to be set up to do that. If you're actually doing something such as malware analysis, which is much more of an advanced topic there, which you kind of more expect at university level for sure, surely that needs to be in a secure lab where students can actually play around with that safely. Certainly not something just to do online. There's much more risk there. So you have these factors of the macro environment in terms of what does the education landscape moving forward? How are people developing these skills? How do they want to develop these skills, and what resources do we need? When we actually then go on to the student factors, what we have is not only is one institution influenced by the learners that come to them, but often this might be out of no choice of the learner. They might be a student wanting to actually study computer science, okay, at A level. They literally might not have a choice unless they travel much further afield, which they might not wish to, or they might not have the capacity to at that kind of age range, okay? What that means is that if students haven't done something, there's a big jump in terms of expectations. There might be these expectations that, okay, if you're coming here to study, you should already have done this, you should have done this at school. What if they haven't? They might not. So that can be an issue. I think another problem that tends to happen with the education sector, especially when there's a focus on results, student results, getting good grades, going on to further studies, is the over-scaffolding, as this one dean termed it, over-scaffolding of learners. Some scaffolding is very good. And I quite often use this quote from this dean of digital faculties. It really stuck with me as scaffolding is good to help learners, you know, funnel them to how they can do something or giving them more freedom. But if you're over-scaffolding them, there's too much structure in place. How are they going to cope when that structure is gone? They simply might not. They might not know how to actually develop the resiliency and skills themselves moving forward, and constantly be thinking that someone's going to give them an answer. All these factors influence a student who's entering the next level of their educational career. And all these factors influence, you know, do I want to go into cybersecurity? I could have a bad experience before when I got taught that subject, and now I'm not interested. There simply might not be the awareness either. Now, in terms of the teaching context, again, you not only have the students playing a part, but the teachers themselves. You might expect that teachers are comfortable or confident in the subject matter. That's not always the case. I'm a firm believer that just because you know a subject area does not mean you are a good teacher of that subject area. You could be the expert of anything, but does that mean you can actually teach that subject? You might be able to disseminate some information, but is that actually in an understandable way? Can you understand the needs of learners? Can you actually read the room so the learners can actually get that? There needs to be that focus on how to teach the subject too. And you can get this expert blind spot where an expert is so familiar with a subject, it's almost sometimes impossible to actually explain that in such a way that is much more simpler for someone that doesn't currently understand that subject. That can be a big issue. You also have, as this one computer lecturer said, my salary would be double if I went into industry. They have that perception. Now, this person very much cared about teaching, very passionate about the subject, but they could get a higher salary, and they were seriously thinking about just going into industry purely just because monetary terms. But this is someone that's really passionate and care about students, and even they're thinking, well, this is a bit ridiculous, how much more I could get here. And then we have this final participant that I spoke to, trying to recruit a computing teacher. They had a job advert for 18 months for a computing teacher and didn't recruit at all. Just because whoever's applied does not have the expertise, and there's that few people out there looking to actually apply because of the previous issue. There's so much more salary that you could potentially get. And if you're teaching, it's not just the teacher. It's the teaching, it's the marking, it's all these other issues. How are you meant to keep up with what's going on in the field, especially computing? So that's another big problem, the teaching context. The big problem with this, however, is that if you aren't recruiting a computing teacher, what do we end up with? We end up with people covering lessons, or someone within a school or college teaching the subject matter, and they're not a subject expert. Now, what I've seen is various maths teachers getting chucked in the deep end to teach computing because, well, you teach maths, so you can teach computing. Yes, computing is inherently got maths fundamentally within it. However, that's a whole different kind of subject matter to get up to speed with. For any teacher, and again, they're then balancing perhaps two subject areas. That's a big challenge, Task processing. So when I talk about task processing, what I'm referring to here is actually the process of teaching itself. Okay, it's not just about the student and the overall teacher. It's actually, what's the environment look like? Do we have the appropriate equipment? Do we have the right software? Do we have the actual infrastructure that supports the environment that we want to create? Now, I had one lecturer say to me before that, look, I want to teach this and this. I really do. I'm really passionate about it. Students should be learning this, but we're like Fort Knox. We literally can actually do anything. Our IT just won't let us. Our senior leadership won't let us. Okay. When I spoke to schools, and there's one school, and they had blocked PowerPoint, believe it or not, PowerPoint. And I think, wow, I don't know what they're using instead. I see so many schools, everyone's using PowerPoint presentation, but they blocked PowerPoint because it was deemed as malicious. It's very, very concerning in terms of how they're managing it. Clearly, in this case, something's happened, and then someone's reacted and worried about it very, very quickly and thought, we must block PowerPoint and stop everyone using PowerPoint. I'm thinking that they probably have, gone back on this, but fear can cause, some, should we say, immediate behaviour that might not be ideal. So we have this environment in terms of funding, resources, all influencing the actual teaching context. If we go a step further than this, what we then go is the nature of outcome or the goals of cyber education. Now, so far, all I've kind of given you is cyber education is very important. We need more people in the sector. We need more skills being developed. We need more teachers to actually teach the subject matter. There's many, many challenges, however, that exist. Now, if we're looking to address these skills gaps, we need to address some of these challenges at the source. Now, to actually say there needs to be an increased funding to schools, colleges is one thing, but again, they're likely to disseminate across that multiple different areas. The other issue you have is, again, for many educational institutions, as is everywhere, I'm sure, on this call right now, cost of living crisis, price of energy. It's not just, people like myself and yourselves that might be having increased energy bills. Educational institutions, schools are having this same energy bill rise as well. When they have all these other pressures, suddenly, actually, that's what might be used or not in terms of advancing higher salaries for teachers or getting extra equipment in, as much as we might want that. Now, while that is something that can't really be done too well, is there anything that can be done in terms of addressing the lack of skilled staff? The lack of skilled teachers, that is. Well, one thing is that can we encourage more people to enter the computing profession, but the teaching of computing? It's not something a lot of students tend to actually see as a direct career path. They might want to go into teaching, but actually computer teaching specifically, it's less so overall. I like the approach that Swansea University take, where they actually have a module at their university, which is teaching as a placement, where they actually have a dedicated module where the student actually works with a school, and they actually not only have experience of teaching, but they're also supporting local schools and colleges in the teaching of the subject matter, and they have this extra expertise that they've learned at university. I think it not only encourages students to actually go into teaching this profession, but it gives schools and colleges that extra bit of support they might need as well, on assuming the student is turning up and not causing too many issues. But I think it's a good approach to take. So we need to encourage more people to actually go into it. And the other issues is, I think, a communication for sure. We need not only teachers to actually want to obviously do these things and have new resources, but they need to actually work with the managers and senior leadership team much more closely and actually keep asking that question of, look, this is the environment we're in, this is the kind of resources we need, otherwise we can't actually teach this subject matter effectively. I think over time, this is slowly getting better and extra resources being put in place. For example, with the T-level funding, with T-levels, there was government funding for organisations to actually adopt the T-level qualifications in the first place, to hopefully encourage this kind of work placement aspect and greater industry expertise. But it's a very slow process, and it takes, I think, more people to be aware of what is the actual cyber education landscape overall. If you don't know about the landscape, you think, well, schools are doing and colleges are doing what they're doing. But actually, there's many issues here. But it's actually, we need to address this at the source. One thing we can address, however, which if I go back to that overall picture of challenges, is at the very source, I had cybersecurity attacks are constantly evolving and changing. That is one thing that we certainly cannot escape. That will only continue to go on. So we can address some aspects, but that certainly will not change. What I would say, however, is because that's not changed, and that also makes the subject very exciting. It's very exciting in the sense that it is constantly developing. It is always something new. So that might entice people that want that change and constantly looking to learn. So when we actually then look at, okay, we want effective cyber education, we kind of know why we want it because there's all these issues going on. What are the actual goals of cyber education? Now, when I say what are the goals of cyber education, the goals of, should I say, education overall should not be whether someone has passed an exam. Passing an exam is a metric of whether they actually have, passed the exam and they know the content for that exam. Is it whether they've completed a piece of coursework? Okay, there's too much focus on assessment perhaps overall. The goal of it is actually that development of the skills, the actual learning take place. Now, because of the nature of results and the importance placed on results, leads to this over scaffolding. So schools are focusing on learners so they can get good grades and help say, well, we've got students achieving these good grades. But it's perhaps not the most reliable metric anyway. I see this sometimes at university as well, where students focus too much on maybe an assessment in terms of, okay, I need to pass the assessment, as opposed to learning about the actual subject beyond that of the assessment. Because cyber education and cybersecurity, the learning will never stop because it's constantly changing. So if we take some principles here, both from some computing teachers, principle, and some existing literature, we can get a wider picture of what the actual goals of cyber education is. So we can take a more official defined definition that students should develop both discipline-specific knowledge and skills, and the softer skills, communication, management, problem solving, leadership. I think many of us will be familiar with having both technical skills and soft skills, both being important for general employability anyway. One principle, I think the most important thing is making them aware digital citizens. So again, what we can do here though is question, what do we mean by aware digital citizens? Is being aware, being up to date with the sector constantly? Perhaps it is. But is it just having that wider knowledge as well as these skills? I think what really resonates with me, however, is this one lecture at college that says, I'm teaching people how to learn, not teaching them a thing. And the students should be taught how to create their own solutions, as opposed to teaching a particular piece of software or a particular programming language, or, you know, how to do something. Is it actually how students can learn themselves, guide them and facilitate that mindset of development, because they'll be going into roles and experiencing tasks that don't exist right now. That is something that is a skill that is hard to quantify and it's hard to pin down. How do you develop that skill? How do you develop that mindset of how to learn? You think, okay, we want students to develop presentation skills, so we make them do presentations. We make students, we want them to learn programming, so we make them do a lot of programming. The assessment could be programming. How do you actually develop that mindset of how to learn? It's a lot harder to gauge, and generally people don't like things that are hard to gauge, because if it's hard to gauge, how do we ensure success? How do you know whether it's been successful or not? That itself can be a challenge. But here we really are wanting to perhaps develop the mindset for, cybersecurity, in terms of being able to adapt, to be resilient, to be aware that we need to constantly change and learn new things, and that the learning never stops. So all these factors lead in terms of what I've just coined as 3P model. Comes from Biggs. This is not 3P model. It's not mine. I have adapted it, however, in terms of what I call the 4P model, because as well as these pre-stage process product factors, the student, teaching, context, task, process, and the nature of outcome, I do think it's important to consider this macro environment and how that influences the sector overall. You have these various government priorities, such as work-based education, academic education. You see this with the increased prevalency of the T-level qualifications. You'll see this in the increased focus on degree apprenticeships, and this agenda that's put forward for having this more work-based focus. What you also have is this focus on increasing the pipeline and quality of educators, i.e. where I mentioned about the bursaries that exist for teachers to go into the sector. If that is the kind of government narrative or government rhetoric that they want, then they'll put the funding towards that. That then influences all these factors on the right-hand side. You do, however, have a variety of regulatory bodies that influence the standard and quality of teaching within the UK. Ofsted, for instance, Office of Standards for Education, monitoring the effectiveness of teaching, checking everything's going all right. Education and Skills Funding Agency, that influences the budget and funding based on student numbers, whether students are deemed as vulnerable or not. And then you have various teacher accreditation programs. So do we have people going in to do a PGCE? Is that something that they need, or we do have other placement opportunities? All these aspects influence this overall factor of the student teaching context, later influences the overall nature of outcome here. Now, the question I always think is, what is the outcome that we want for cybersecurity? Is it the technical skills? Is it the softer skills? decision making, leadership, communication? Is it to be what you could call industry ready? You have all of these skills and you have that work experience, so you can go straight into a role and hit the ground running. Is it the ability to learn new things? Or is it actually, okay, you've got this grade, you've got this certification, because we say that is the most important metric. It could be all of these things. In some instances, it could be just some of them. The problem is that everyone will have their own perception of what is perhaps important. Employers will have a different focus on what they also deem important for their own specific job role. So when you actually then look at education that's trying to provide a skill set for many job roles, it's difficult to ascertain exactly what should cyber education actually be and what are our actual end goals of cyber education. So again, what we have with this is some key questions that come from this. The first thing is, what's quite key is that we know there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach. How are we actually going to deal with any of these challenges that we've identified? We can't just have a blanket policy or blanket something that we adopt. It needs to be more specific for that. So we can ask the question, okay, what is cyber education? What does it look like? Okay, how is that embedded within a curriculum? How is it taught? As I've just alluded to, though, what are the goals of cyber education? Now, I've illustrated in the previous slide a couple here: the technical skills, the soft skills, being industry ready. If we say, okay, these are some of the goals of cyber education, the then question is why? Why are these the goals? Why are the goals we've set out? But more importantly, who decides on this? Who actually decides what is important? Is it education providers? Is it general society? Is it industry, employers? Is it someone like myself who's teaching the subject matter? Is it other lecturers? Who is it? Now, when we think we have all these different stakeholders coming into the fold of, trying to create this general picture of what it should look like and what our goal should be, you have so many people, this gets very convoluted in terms of what the goals are. And all it takes is to get, okay, this is what we want, and then suddenly something new comes along. Or there's some new kind of attack or something that, no one's actually seen before, and it's whole something new. Suddenly we need to adapt again. It's constantly evolving, constantly changing, which makes these questions ever so difficult to actually truly nail down what it is. So what we actually need to do here is think, okay, what are the actual goals we want to achieve? Education needs to decide what are the goals we want to achieve specifically, and we need to work backwards and then design the curriculum, the assessment, and the suitable teaching methods, or the pedagogical approaches as it's often called, for these goals in the first place. Because without that, how do we actually know that we're going to achieve our goals actually in the end? Okay. These various references that I've used throughout the slides here. But I'm more than happy to take any questions that any of you might have about cyber education or my general perspectives on the teaching of the subject matter. And by all means, if you don't have any questions now, but you might think of something later on, please feel free to contact me at jallison1@gloucester.ac.uk. Thank you all very much for listening.
Brilliant, Jordan. That's such an informative talk and very, very interesting area. I'm sure we're going to get some very interesting questions and interaction as well. So everyone, feel free to open up your mic if you want and ask questions to Jordan, or if you don't want to do it via your mic, you're free to drop questions in the chat.
I've got a question.
Yeah, go on, Chris.
How has cloud computing opened up opportunities for educational resources in the last few years with you being remote?
Well, I think when you first ask about cloud computing, the initial thing that jumps to mind is actually the resources that some of these cloud providers are actually providing themselves to get people into the sector. So if you take AWS as an example, and AWS Educate and the various certifications that they offer, they have their whole resources and training that they actually offer to get people to do the certification almost as a pathway to direct them straight into actually going into employment for them or in that kind of role, and perhaps using AWS. I think one of the issues that is in terms of education generally is, what does education actually look like? And for many people, it will certainly differ. For some people, they'll certainly say, especially in the computing world, there's so much that you can actually get just from looking on YouTube. There is so many people that just create very useful resources off their own bat just to share with the community. I think the computing community overall is very fortunate in the sense of how many people actually share their resources and knowledge anyway. And I think remote working and various people getting used to remote working, they'll think, well, if I can work like this, surely I can actually be educated like this to further their career in terms of CPD, etc. So I think with, should we say, cloud overall, not only as a subject matter, but you have these organisations again offering all these other pathways for getting into that as well. Does that answer your question at all, Chris? I feel like I may have gone off track there.
No, that's good. That's a good explanation. Yeah, that's good. Thank you for answering that.
Brilliant, Jordan. There's one in the chat. What are these cybersecurity innovations for 2023?
Cybersecurity innovations for 2023. I think, well, when we think of innovations, I think there's quite a few things that we've actually got here. Now, there's some of the, should we say, the more standard ones that everyone tends to think of. So these aren't particularly innovative too much, but some might argue that they are. The increased prevalence of AI in terms of cybersecurity and the use of AI within cybersecurity products and features, that's certainly coming into for a lot more. Another one that, again, is not new, but it's certainly, coming into its own a lot more, even more so now, is the use of big data. So much data is being processed now in the past couple of years than it was, years ago. There's so much data being created, and then the use of that in ensuring good, should we say, cybersecurity practice or monitoring. I think the other thing that we might have, which is, to be honest, more of a challenge than anything else, is where the landscape is going through the prevalency of the interconnectivity in terms of IoT devices and so on. With this increased opportunity for connectivity, we have increased opportunities for exploitation. So with more and more IoT devices, yes, that creates us, we have these sensors, we can do this extra monitoring, we can be more reactive as we need. But from a cybersecurity standpoint, we have some issues there, because we now have these smaller devices, less processing power generally. So we need to be more innovative in how we're managing that. And I think the other one you've got finally there, although I'm certainly not an expert on this, is the increased prevalence in use of blockchain. I think overall in the past few years, blockchain overall has got a bit of a bad rap because of cryptocurrency. And all it takes is, within the news recently with the companies collapsing, it's cryptocurrency is this, and it's all placed on blockchain being bad, just because you have various cryptocurrency tokens that are perhaps not the best, for instance, but it does have a lot of real use when blockchain is used well. The problem is in terms of it's still early days of that, and a lot of people don't have the expertise or knowledge of what it actually is in the first place. But in terms of the aspect of decentralization, how that can be used for various different applications, both in finance and other business domains, I think it's certainly one to keep an eye on, especially how that could be used cybersecurity wise. I think the key thing though is what I say that might be the case for 2023. All it takes is something new to happen, and then that's released, and then that takes the world by storm. In the past week or so, although somewhat unrelated, the AI chatbot of ChatGPT, which I think was released 6 days ago now, that's already really reached 1 million users just on that. So only released 6 days, it's already got 1 million users. the fastest ever to reach 1 million users. Now, when you think about that, 6 days, 1 million users, what's it going to be next week or the week after? This is just an AI chatbot tool. Something could come along and suddenly it just takes the world by storm. So there's the ones I've discussed, but I certainly think anything could, come along without too much notice as well. But that remains to be seen.
Brilliant. Do we have more questions? Again, feel free to open your mic if you want to ask directly or drop a question in the chat. In the meantime, I do have a question, Jordan, especially regarding curriculum. You talked about curriculum quite a lot and so on. And one thing that I have found, obviously, are the generations. And you see, previously, we would have students with less programming background and hence, obviously, less cybersecurity background. And a challenge I can start to see happening right now with new undergrad students is that's shifting quite a lot. So you now have students that would have a bit more of experience in programming, a bit more of knowledge in cybersecurity. So how do you see the challenge of streamlining this process? You see, as generations they go through, and you have new generations that are more cyber aware, or they have new knowledge or more up-to-date knowledge into cybersecurity and these areas. How do you see this streamlining in the future?
I think a lot of this starts with that general kind of awareness of what actually is being taught anyway. Now, when we did that Cybot mapping of qualifications, in terms of the utilization of Cybot, there's one paper that looked at general international curriculum, and it always shocked me that has anyone actually looked at this in the first place? I think I'm in the fortunate perspective in that I have worked with many schools and colleges, so I'm aware what's going on, and I'm working in a university environment, so I also kind of know what is going on. So for my own teaching, I think I kind of have a better understanding of what's being taught beforehand, so how I might map that to what I'm delivering. Yourself, in a similar perspective, having worked in a college before, you kind of have that background knowledge. Now, there's going to be a variety of university teaching staff that will just come straight from industry, and it will be, okay, what is university level teaching? They might have that subject expertise, but then the teaching expertise might be a bit more lacking. And then it's, where do I actually level myself in terms of that? I certainly think there's more work that can be done between universities and schools and colleges, especially where there's the mutual opportunities for skills development. So where I discussed that kind of model of a module where students can actually go and teach a subject or help a computing teacher in local schools, not only support schools, but by the university working in partnership with schools and colleges, by default, they have a greater understanding of what is actually being taught and how that's being developed, with the students themselves developing this extra level of expertise of teaching the subject, developing presentation skills, communication skills, these softer elements. But certainly I don't think there's any better way to become confident in a subject than actually having to teach it. So with that, I certainly think the university should be working more in partnership, not just with employers, but also with schools, colleges, etc. You see this at plenty of schools where they have both the kind of GCSE level and they have a sixth form. Same teachers, they kind of know what's taught, so they know how to largely adapt their delivery. The difficulty is when you have students going straight to a college and they're not working in partnership. By and large, however, a lot of colleges and universities will have many feeder schools and colleges. So it's impossible to work with everyone, but there will be main providers where learners will continue on through. So if you work in partnership with some of these, you might get a better understanding of how can we actually overall pitch what we're teaching. But I think that disparity of learners is, I think, one of the most pressing challenges actually, because how do you manage a class? You have some students that are, some students are really advanced and they think, why am I being taught this? They actually lead to frustration. Where some are saying, you're doing this too advanced. And I'm sure you've been in class, Tiago, where you have students that say this exact issue. It's too advanced and it's not advanced enough. where do you call the balance? That's difficult, and each year it can differ.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Jordan. We have another one. What about the metaverse? Are users going to lose privacy by using it? What measures we shall take by using of upcoming Web3? Don't know if you can or you want to address that.
I mean, I can have a stab at this, but I certainly think this is perhaps something a bit out the realms of my expertise, I'm afraid, with this. I think I'll focus firstly on the aspect of privacy. And I think one of the things to bear in mind is what is deemed as the norm in terms of privacy. Now, where I say this, if I'm teaching a subject matter to university students, they have, by and large, many students will tend to be school leavers, so they'll generally be kind of 18, 19, early 20s. There'll be mature students as well, but they're of that age. What is deemed as the norm for them is based on how they've grown up and their experience. The problem is now, as you have much younger students, kids born now, okay, early days, they'll be experiencing the norm for them in terms of how they disclose information and what information does become the norm for them. So they won't actually perhaps perceive it as much of a privacy issue as someone like myself might. What shook me the other day was where I overheard a conversation where it's a parent, and they were saying about an assignment that they were given, their daughter was given at school, and they were in year 8. Okay, so they'd be about 13 years old. What they had to do, they had to, for their homework, create a TikTok video, a published TikTok video about how their perspective about this historical event, talking about it. Now, when you have homework being assigned that is exclusively about posting information in your perspective of something online, the whole aspect of what is the norm in terms of privacy starts getting lost a bit. Because if that's becoming the norm, people don't really think too much of it as much. I think we're much more focused on privacy if we have had privacy. If we've not had privacy, we suddenly aren't focused about, well, this is just, we always share information, we're always giving stuff away. I've grown up with doing this, so you don't really question it as much. So in terms of the metaverse, are they going to lose privacy? I'd say perhaps. I'm afraid this is certainly something that not my expertise in terms of how to address, but I think it's important to bear in mind what does privacy actually look like, and the norm as we move forward is going to be the less privacy is going to become the norm, but it will still just be termed our privacy. Hopefully that answers your question there somewhat. Zainab, you've got a question. Thank you very much. Cheers, Zainab. My question: how do you see the reflection proposed 4P model enhancing the resilience of cyber education methodologies? The reflection of the proposed 4P model. I think when we actually think of any kind of pathway of cyber education into the methodology of teaching, I suppose we're talking about here, and how we're teaching the actual subject matter. I think for me, when I was putting all this together, it certainly made me think that we need to think at the end goal. And we can sometimes lose what is the end goal. I think as educators of the subject of computing and cybersecurity, something new comes along and we think, okay, we need to teach that. This is what's new, this is what's current. And there's some merit in that, but I think we can lose focus on, are we actually focused on developing teaching the latest thing, or actually are we focusing on making sure students are aware of latest developments, but we're developing that skill set of adaptability, being able to learn new things, and so on. So I think it's very easy to lose focus on what actually matters in terms of our teaching. This week I'm teaching a master's course, Information Security Management, and the focus there, I'm focusing, to be honest, less on actually the content per se, but actually what is information security management about? management, decision making, being able to actually process and take in a lot of information to actually make an informed right decision based on the context of an organization in terms of what resources do we currently have, what infrastructure we got set up, what is our staff, what are the actual options in front of us to make the right course of action, and less so about, you know, this is this framework. Yes, there are various frameworks you can map, but if we're actually wanting to teach information security management, surely we'll want to make sure that people are aware and can make the right decisions for a given context. So I think we certainly need to focus more on what is the goals, and that's why I end with what is the goals and why are those goals. And I think this needs to be a collaborative effort. Everyone will have their own perspective. I'll have my own perspective from what the work I've done and the aspects I've done. Yourself, Zainab, you'll have your own approach from the research you are doing, and also in terms of your own subjects that you teach, in terms of what you have in your experience has worked well and also what's not. The reality is, however, is that there needs to be more community and collaborative work to be done in terms of what is our overall goal here, not just on a module or a unit of study or a certain topic area in a school GCSE specification, but actually, what's the actual goal of our course here? Then we can actually work backwards more about, yeah, this is what we should actually embed in terms of how we ensure that what we're doing is up to speed and it's actually doing the job that we asked of it. So it's that constant reflective, and to be honest, I think it's about continually getting feedback about what is working and not, both from self-reflection, but working with others, by sharing different approaches. And I think for the educational sector overall, especially schools and colleges, where you have computing teachers in their silos, quite isolated, they need that network, that support. I've tried this really worked very well. Oh, thanks very much. I'll see if I can adapt that in my classes. We want to go away from this. This is what I'm doing, this is what we're doing, and naturally competitive with each other. University league tables competitive with each other, schools competitive based on results. But really, if we focus more on the collaboration, then we're just looking for constant improvement overall. That's what's needed, but ultimately, there's still competitiveness from nature of business. Great.
Yeah.
I saw you that thumbs up, so.
Thank you, Jordan.
That's brilliant. Any more questions? I cannot see any questions in the chat. So I think in that case, Jordan, once again, thank you very much. Also, really, really interesting talk. Such an important area. And I'm quite happy with the engagement we had, as well with the number of people we have had today. Again, this talk will be recorded and be made available in our BCS webpage. So thank you very much, everyone, for being part of this webinar. We're still going to have our monthly webinar, so keep an eye to the communications. Thank you again, Jordan, for that. And it was really good to have you here with us today. And I wish you everyone a very good evening.
Thank you much for everyone. Thank you for participating, listening in. And as I said, if you have any questions, do reach out if you happen to think of anything.